items that have come in. So sprint lengths not being the same always, and some sprints are longer than the others relating to velocity. All right, so that's
So,
one.
Shman, we can start talking about one by one, maybe a few minutes.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think I'll do that. So there is that. Cool. So sprint lengths not being the same always. So Scrum does.
That's may I jump
Sure,
in?
sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that's something we need to fix. If you so what we are saying here is that, right? Uh, what a sprint is? It's a time box, right? So changing the time box is useful at times, but it shouldn't be just done without proper planning. Example, uh, so if you feel like you need to move faster, you need to go through the entire development life cycle within a week, then spending 2 weeks, it's a good enough context for you to make that decision. So then you're going to say, hey, let's change our sprint duration to 1 week simply because we want to get done certain stories within a week. So we can't wait 2 weeks in order to do the demo and then get the stories done, right? So I think that's a good enough reason. So there can be many reasons, few reasons that you can actually help, right, in changing, adjusting the sprint window. However, if you are just changing due to a reason which is not really making sense, my recommendation would be don't do that, right? So that said, so these are some of the times I would support changing the sprint time box. So when it comes to the new year, when it comes to the December, right? What happens is a lot of guys will go on leave, stakeholders might not be available. Therefore, running a 2 week sprint sometimes doesn't make sense because one thing is that a lot of guys will be on leave, right? Stakeholders are not available for the demos or that, so you're not going to go on production. Fact that you don't get the sufficient reviews. So pretty much in every company that I have been working, I have been supporting the decision that let's extend the timeline for the sprint during these few weeks, right? Because that's a good enough time for us to do a bit of cleanup, work on the technical improvements, etc., right? Plus plan some releases so that we have something ready as we come back, right? Otherwise, do not change the sprint length, rather change the scope, right? In agile planning, what we are saying, what we are trying to do, one of the main key strategies that we need to be consistent on is keeping the time box fixed, adjusting the scope. You have a fixed time box, right? What you adjust is the scope. What are you trying to deliver within that time box? That can change, right? This is one of the key aspects that you need to get done. Otherwise, you will not be able to stabilize your velocity. You will not be able to figure out what exactly you can get done within a given time window, right? Not sure who added it. I don't have the visibility to the board.
Yeah, that's true. Hope that answers the question to an extent. And just to add on as well, so one advantage of having that constant velocity or near constant, that is that the team gets that routine going on. So let's say we have a 2 week sprint.
Yeah.
There isn't a confusion as to how many weeks is my next sprint going to be in. When should I start thinking about the last part of the release, which might probably be the deployments and so on. It's all becomes second nature. So that's another advantage of having that near constant
Yeah, so
velocity.
that's basically written in the book, right?
Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
so so you can try to adjust, but you will feel that that's not going to help if you are constantly
Correct.
changing the sprint length. So keep that
Yeah,
sprint length constant. Try to adjust the scope, right? That doesn't harm, right? So I mean, just changing the sprint length will not help you is kind of my stance at a high level. It You might have a very unique context as well.
And then there's also another question around the team is letting the team, I guess, lead the sizing as he or she
Okay.
knows the best.
Okay.
That's uh, so. Uh, One point that I would like to point that out is that that's actually a pretty good thing. It's not really a drawback as such. It's
I would
actually an
challenge that, Sochman.
right.
I would
Yeah,
challenge, and Iranga is one of the architects
right.
at Westoria. So
Okay.
as we started doing this actually, right? So I mean,
Right.
we are still trying to optimize what we do. One
Yeah.
thing we did very consciously is that stay away from putting lead stars in the judgment. Yeah. So the thing is this, right? When the lead is, it doesn't have to be a lead, it is a senior person, others tend to get biased around what you're saying, right?
Right. Right.
So they look for a kind of a validation, and as well as sometimes I say there is a huge deviation, right, from between the estimate given by the lead and estimate given by the colleagues. Then colleagues
Correct.
tend to be biased above the stance of the lead. That's kind of not helping, because one thing is that our culture is that we respect, right? We respect the seniors, we respect the elders. I mean, particularly when you know that someone is credible on a particular domain, right? In the application particularly, they tend to listen to those guys, right? So Sushman, my advice is you need to kind of control that. If you feel like everyone is listening to the lead, they are being biased about the estimation,
Yeah.
just let the team do it. The lead can watch it, give a bit of consulting, right?
Sure. Sure.
Kind of a
Yeah.
validation than just judgment. Again, when you put the judgment, you need to ensure that team will not be distracted by
Yeah.
what is being said, right? If they feel like there's something wrong, we are always getting, every day we get the estimations wrong, then they are kind of reluctant to give their opinion, and then
That's
challenge the thinking, right?
that's true. Yeah. I think that's one of the points that we are covering as well pretty soon. So there'll be a bit more around that. Cool.
Can
So
I
we'll
can
just
I
take.
can I
Sure.
a
Please
few
go ahead.
Yes,
words? Yeah.
Kiruna. Yes,
On the
yes.
same line. I think I see two different points on the same line. One thing is like, I mean, if you are really doing relative estimations, even if it's a lead or even if it's a software engineer who has joined just 2 days ago,
Yeah.
still the value that both of them will come up might be relatively the same, because you always try to do some comparison rather than coming up with the absolute values. So I mean, in the instances where I have seen where leads come up with different values is mainly because even though the teams claim that they do relative estimations, actually they are not doing that. Rather, what they do is they are more biased towards absolute estimations.
Correct.
Then there are big differences between a person who has good experience and maybe a person with less experience. So one point would be like, if you are really doing relative estimations, still it will sums up to the same kind of number. That's one thing. And also, to avoid such things, another thing that you could try out would be like, things like, planning poker, like, maybe whether you can do it physically or whether you can use an online tool where you will not get biased through different, other people's, values. But then once everybody has kind of, shared their viewpoint, then you can always have, high-low discussions where even a newbie or even a, 10-year experienced guy can share their views after that, once they have done the estimation. So two different things that you can, two different points where you can think of as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Hiruna. So this is exactly my stance would be in a kind of ideal world, right? So one of my observations, because particularly at the initial stages, right? So one thing is that you are spot on that we need to kind of get everyone involved in the estimation process. That's part of it, right? So whether you are a junior guy or whether you are a senior guy, your insights will help everyone to understand the requirement better and also the estimation better. right? So, however, our culture is such that uh, some of our members, particularly when they are not really comfortable with the setup, when they are new to the application, they tend to kind of go by what the seniors say, right? So due to this, in certain cases, not all the cases, right, all in all contexts, so I have adjusted the practice, but I totally agree with you that the concept says, hey, whether you are a senior guy or a junior guy, just join the team, you should still estimate, right? The right way to do is, as you said, let the new guy estimate with the understanding he or she has. Then during the planning poker discussion, we will get to know what everyone is thinking about the estimate, right? So we pick up the outliers and then start discussing, try to come up with a medium value. Yeah, so I think that's the kind of the right stance that we should take. So what I told about is kind of a practical thing that I observe. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
Hirona,
makes sense.
thank you for your input, appreciate it.
That's true. There's also agreement in the chat down there. Dulan W says it's pretty much a similar routine that happens.
Yeah, so it's kind of, yeah, so it's just because it's not because the lead shouldn't be doing it. It's just that that's how generally happens, particularly in our culture. So we need to kind of uplift that and kind of change that, rather than just going by what we just said also, right? So gradually let's get everyone involved, but everyone is should be able to challenge the thinking, right? I have seen in certain contexts, one guy, there was only just one guy saying lesser number, right? Let's say 20, majority says 20, the one guy says 3. So I have seen that guy had challenged the thinking and got everyone else to agree that he is right. But it's highly unlikely that would happen in a very new team, right? If they're not really really comfortable challenging the thinking. So that's the right way to go, right? So we need to get the team to challenge it.
That's true.
Hiruna, thank you for your time, Hiruna, appreciate it.
Cool. We will. There are a couple of more questions, but we'll just jump back in and come back to these once again towards the end.
Sure.
Cool. Hope you can see my screen as it was. I'm sharing the challenges and overcoming them slide.
Yep, I see it.
Okay, cool. All right. Thanks everyone for your interaction. We'll move ahead in that case. Cool. So, although we touch upon story points and it was fairly easy to understand what the need was, that it was for planning, one of the first places where we go wrong right off the bat is simply misunderstanding the need of why we are using story points in the first place. Right? People tend to use it for commitments. Like for example, we do set them down in sprints. We have this set of story points. They're broken down really well. They have various story point estimates and so on. And now those are taken as strong hard commitments of the roadmap and so on. While we were supposed to be using it for planning out and seeing how big a story is and how can we fit this in a sprint and let the development and development activities take the course of delivery of value. Now we've gone down the path where we are looking at how do we tie up these two, absolute delivery dates. How can we tie up this as a commitment? Here, what's going on as a wrong practice is, yes, we did misunderstand the need for story points, but we've also misunderstood the Scrum concept of commitments itself. In Scrum, the commitment is by the delivery team or the Scrum team itself, the development team, to be more specific, is that the team focuses on the success of the sprint goal rather than a pure 100% commitment of the delivery of a particular item. The goal is kept above the entire thing. So quality matters. The scope of what we can do is what is going to be affected based on how much of that we can cover in a sprint. So that's one of those first things that are kind of misunderstood. So fairly easy way for us to get this corrected is by actually educating the people on what these different terminologies mean. Even though we might be quite tempted to roll out Scrum pretty easily across a Scrum team, we might get other people who are part of the other stakeholder groups as well. So they would also have to be educated to a certain extent to make this whole, Scrum implementation quite compatible for all aspects of, the delivery as well. So not just the stakeholders who are from the customer side, but also it might involve the management side of things as well. So internal stakeholders to an extent. So that's that part. Next up, we have tying up time values. So once again, deviating away from the whole purpose of bringing up story values was to stay away from time values, whereas we end up bringing that factor, like for example, having that guideline maybe internally to have this many story points maybe equal to this many, this many man days of work. While it's fair to have that for various purposes, like you want to build customers, you want to know roughly how long it would take to, deliver a particular item. That's a fair, ask from the stakeholder groups, because those are how business decisions are ultimately made, right? But at the same time, we also have to respect that these are ballpark figures to an extent, or a very high level estimate, or even to an estimate that, to an extent that it takes into consideration other factors as well, which can bring in variable amounts of time length. So it's not purely just a matter of assigning delivery dates on them or just tying up time values, but to stay away from this. So this would once again need that constant guidance to the team, which might be communicating this or to the stakeholders as well as to what we are actually having in terms of story points, what these are in terms of what the purpose of story points is, and taking that forward. So that's another thing where things could go wrong. Staying on a similar topic, something that continues on is that stakeholders are still based on time values, like I said, the business decisions and so on. So these, once again, we might have to have a way of handling those questions. So maybe in terms of bringing up the discussion about billing to absolute, billing after the fact, or not having billing that goes for time and material instead of billing ahead of time, things like that. So that would be an ideal situation. But if not, we might have to come up with those database numbers, which kind of estimates as to how many story points can we get done in a certain sprint or so. So that's another tricky area we would have to, keep an eye out for. Then on, I move to the next part where teams tend to focus on their own specialization.
So Shman, you are breaking up.
Oh, sorry. Is it better now? I hope it's better now.
Now it's better. Yep.
Okay, let me stop my video to get a better bandwidth. Cool.
Let's try.
All right. So back on this slide, focusing on specialization. So this is where team members tend to focus on just their own individual tasks, like development. So I'm just talking about coding side of things, differentiating that term from the development team. So let's say take the engineers or development team members who would just be specializing maybe in database engineering side, or maybe it's the QA side of people. Those specialists start thinking about only their aspects and try to provide an estimate just for their tasks alone. So this is it's an incorrect way of estimating. We shouldn't be estimating for just a single aspect of a story, like just the development part of it, or the deployment part of it, or even the UI aspects of it. So those should ideally be one whole estimate altogether is what we are looking for. So there are two ways where this could go wrong. One is where the story is not sliced appropriately, which we'll cover in the next slide. The second is if the people are only focusing on their parts and trying to only provide an estimate for their areas of specialization and are not really thinking about the other areas. The advantage we could get out of thinking about other areas as well is that it strengthens the quality aspect of delivery. Right? So if the developers are thinking about at the beginning itself, if they are thinking about how this user story is going to be tested and how it's going to be deployed, we would get a good understanding of what they should do as part of their areas beforehand, so that it eases the rest of the phases, right? The things that follow. Similarly, if QAs also think about how developers should be would tackle this problem and understand that side of things, they could make a better and informed decision about the QA process. So just a very generic example that I'm taking, but that's the gist of it and the essence of what I'm talking about. So in this, the team might need some guidance in terms of what they should be looking for. If there are if there are greatly different estimates within the team, this might be a reason why the team members are providing different estimates in the first round of planning poker, where we try estimating. So if the developers' estimates are different and greatly different from the QA members, that, or if you see a pattern like that, this could be an underlying factor. And so this could be areas that you could probe into during your either the same estimation session itself, to make sure that that is not a missed area, or else it could even be taken up at the retrospective, which is the ideal place for these discussions to take place. But all in all, it goes back to bringing that whole team together, and having them together also kind of removes that need for people to be estimating differently. So having them all together forces them to interact, and also bring in that whole conversation to happen around the story itself. Niro, anything to add from your side around this topic? Sorry, Niro. I don't know if it's me, but I don't really hear you. Seems like Niro has dropped off. I'll carry this on. Sorry about that. Next, I jump into incorrectly sliced user stories. So continuing on from a little bit before, where we were talking about the previous slide itself. So story slicing is another technique that is supposed to be used in as part of these estimations. So to bring these stories down into not only a small enough size, but also to a meaningful deliverable. So that's where user story slicing comes in. And previous sessions, if you have attended Niro's talks, he does talk about user story slicing in much greater detail. But to summarize it, the ideal way of slicing user stories is for it to be appropriately sized, and also to be something that can be delivered in as soon as possible, ideally, in a couple of days, or if it doesn't really help out, at least in a sprint, but also to have it a fully meaningful area, which at least a customer can get a certain amount of value from it, right? So which means it wouldn't make sense for us to just focus on development alone, or the coding aspect of it, or engineering aspect of it, and forget about QA, because the QA part would actually be needed to bring it forward. Similarly, let's take UI aspect of it. If the UI aspect is something that would be essential to provide value to the end user, then that part would also have to be done. So that's when the story would be complete. So that's a very, very small and condensed version of what vertical slicing is and story slicing is. But that's the essence of it, and that's what is required for a correctly sliced story. Uh, a big no for user story slicing would be to horizontally slice it, which is to take one aspect of development, for example, purely database development. So that is on its own, it's not really going to provide value to the user. It's not something that could possibly be delivered to an end user to provide uh, value. And so here, the point to take home is that story slicing is something that would have to be encouraged and also has to become a team sport within the team itself. So taking one of those points from the question board itself, there was a point about estimations taking a little too long or estimations taking quite a while to take place. So one of the uh, parts that might end up happening in the estimation process would where the team would come in and figure out that something is too big, and they might end up going back with just sliced user stories rather than providing the estimates themselves. At first, it might look like that was a wasted session because you were looking to get an estimate, but you ended up with no estimates but more stories than you started with, right? But what would have gone through at that point is that together with the whole team, the team would have understood, that larger user story and got to the point where they ended up breaking it into much smaller pieces, but also ended up leaving with a lot more understanding than when they started that estimation session, right? So the time that we think of as overheads over here will end up being saved when the actual sprint starts or as we proceed to the next rounds of estimation or at the point where the sprint starts. We wouldn't have to go into as much detail as we would need to if we hadn't really had this previous session about breaking them down and estimating them. So that's one of those areas where it seems like it's an overhead, but ultimately if you add it all up, it ends up as not too different, and in the best case it might produce a valuable and a quality output in the end.
So
Niro,
Shwan,
any from your side?
if I may add few thoughts, I think you did a great explanation there, Sushman. Few things, right? So if you can go back to the previous slide, Sushman.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, so this is one of the big problems in many teams. I think majority of our teams face this particular challenge at one point of our transition from traditional way of working to agility. Why? Because we are so used to claim for a given expertise, right? In our teams, we have developers, we have quality engineers. So the it's normal that when they estimate, they think of what they have to do in completing a story, right? So whenever you start story point estimations, when you ask everyone to estimate, what happens is they think of what they do and estimate it, right? So you need to ask, what did you estimate? Then they say the QA, right? QA guy says, I estimated the QA effort. Then you need to say no. You need to estimate the overall effort, overall bigness, right? Here's the trick. Just because you say that, they are not able to figure that out. Why? Because they work in silos, right? Mainly your team might work on these silos where developers do their work alone. Once the development is ready to test, then that's the moment they pass that story to the QA. So of course the QA will not know what exactly the effort and what exactly we are doing in terms of the development of that story, right? They are just aware of the QA involvement. That is why when you ask them to estimate, they are just going to pick up the thoughts for that involvement. Then they say, okay, last time I spent this much of time. This is kind of a big one. Therefore, this story also should be somewhat similar, right? They just think of the testing perspective. If it's a QA, If it's a developer, they just think about the development. They are not worried about the completion of it. How do we sort this out? Few things, right? So you need to break that silo. You have to break those silos and say, hey team, let's work together, right? Now, give them a story, right? Make the QA and developers collectively responsible for delivering that story. So this is the starting of solving that problem, right? So if you don't solve this siloed problem, you're not going to be agile at any point of time. If you start fixing it, definitely at one point of time, you will feel like now you are really, really agile, right? You are really collaborative than just working on their silos, your own silos, right? So then when you start estimating, you're not thinking of your specialization. You're thinking of the overall DOD, right? So that's one thing. And Sushman, could you move into the next slide? Yeah, the slicing is another problem, right? So look at estimations this way. So you have 2 week sprint. If it's 2 weeks, if it's 1 week, that is 1 week sprint. Within these 2 weeks or 1 week, what you need to monitor in terms of the progress is what the team is doing daily basis. Now, this is where Sushman is saying, incorrectly sized user stories will lead to the wrong estimations, right? It might be right, but they are too big or they are not really making sense in terms of progressing. So, first check whether your stories are small enough for the team to complete daily basis. If a particular story takes more than few days, that's a wrong story. I mean, there can be situations where you can't break down a particular story further, right? Though, so you end up saying this is the smaller size, it's 5 days, but it shouldn't be just normal, right? Those are exceptional cases, but most of the time, you should be able to create vertical slices that are doable within just few days of time, right? The ideally every day you should be able to do something. Certain things will spend few days, but not the entire sprint, right? So don't wait until the last day of the sprint to see that something is done. That's a guaranteed way of getting this practice strong. Then you end up estimating all the stories. Your total estimation becomes, let's say, 200. So what is the completion, right? Nothing is completed because you have a big story which is still not done, right? So this is a guaranteed way to frustrate your stakeholders, telling them that we could not do anything, right? So if you can break one big story into 5 to 6 stories, that means, right, you can, let's say you deliver 5 stories, that's only one story that is not done, right? You get what I'm saying? So that will help you to master this practice. So what we are generally doing is, without fixing the root problems, we are trying to see how we can improve the way we estimate using story points. You will estimate, your estimations also will be right, but you're not going to show any progress. You're not going to get a sense of achievement or satisfaction as a team. You get frustrated at the end of the sprint, knowing that you could not do any story because your stories are too big. Yeah. So fixing the estimation problem starts with the right approach, with the root problems that you have. So you have to, some of the root problems are these, right? So most of the teams, until we pay enough attention, most of your teams will have big stories, right? If you see you're burned down, not progressing, you're not going to do any good. So what I do as a scrum master or someone working with teams is basically asking that question daily basis, right? In the daily scrum, I ask, okay, what can we complete today? So this kind of insists that initially it kind of push the guys to think loud and then get really focused. Gradually they start getting this into their habit loop. So whenever they start working on something, they start thinking, hey, what can we complete, right? So even just before the last day of the sprint, just before doing the planning, in the daily scrum of the, ninth day of the sprint, you can ask, okay, how is the progress being made overall? Are we able to complete everything, right? So then they pay extra focus to complete the stories done. So this is a greater way of going back to the stakeholders and saying, hey, we plan 200 story points, we have delivered them. Worst come worst, you would say, we plan for 200 story points, however, we could not do 25% of it. It is still good, right? Dan said we could not complete any story points. Yep. Wanted to mention it, although I know that it's going to take a little time.
Yeah, it's a
Yep.
good point, I guess, because ultimately customers did get value at the end of the sprint, rather than
Yep.
if it was too big and they could not get anything at all. Yeah,
Yes, Sushman. Thank you.
cool. And the final part that I would just identified over here is when story points ultimately are used as a measure of productivity. So velocity, that is, at the end of the sprint. The reason why this comes up is because it's a nice number that we come at the end of the sprint. So velocity is the number of story points worth of items we were able to complete in a sprint. So yes, we do target to have that, near constant velocity. So let's say the past few sprints we have been coming up with completing about 50, maybe 60 odd story points, depending on the team. And then all of a sudden we have a, dip of maybe 50, maybe by 10 or so. And then that kind of becomes like a concern, both for the, people who are expecting the releases to come in, and also from the management and so on.
I think it's Sushman's connection. So maybe until Sushman comes back, I will pick it up, right? So so this is about another paradox that we have, right? So the productivity. Oh, Sushman is back. Sushman.
Sorry about that. That was
Yeah,
pretty bad.
no problem. You can go on. You can continue.
Don't mind me, Nero. Could you give me the host privileges back? I took it off for.
Yep.
Thank you.
Done.
Cool. As I was saying, so it ends up being that measure of productivity for various stakeholders. And so any ups and downs are kind of closely monitored, and which kind of puts the team under the microscope at times. And basically, the team is made to deliver X amount of stories in a sprint and so on. So here again, we've forgotten all about why. At this point, we have probably forgotten about why we came into the whole story point conversation. It was all supposed to be that metric for planning a sprint, right? How many items can we take into a sprint and try and deliver them at the end of the sprint? That was the question that we wanted to ask. But we ultimately ended up saying these are the items that have to be delivered at the sprint. So that's where things have changed. Whereas it used to be something that the developers pick from a sprint, but again, this is something that ties up that incorrect understanding of the whole point of commitment provided from the team. The team, yes, does try and attempts to get as many stories out, but there's also those other factors that could determine the course of the story as well. So maybe unknown risks, unknown complexities that were not accounted for. So these are factors that can kind of derail something from going on right. or it was various other factors like team members who were new, which were not accounted for. So various factors. So what would we have to do in terms if the team is unable to achieve its velocity is a completely different question from why we would have to have story points being used for. So velocity and reductions and increases for prolonged period of time would have to be addressed differently at something like the sprint retrospective for to see how we could maybe reduce overheads. Can we make our processes efficient? So those would be the questions surrounding that. Or are we doing an incorrect estimate for a long period of time? Is it time for us to rethink how we are doing estimations, as in are we doing something wrong with the estimates, or are we underestimating things, are we overestimating things? So that's the questions that should be addressed in terms of velocity. But again, it there is very little connection from why for having that as a measure of productivity at the end of the day. So story points should not again end up being a measure of productivity through velocity. And here the ideal way is for us to, it would help if these were points that were discussed at the beginning of a Scrum implementation, ideally, because that's where people, stakeholders are more open to input and so on. But even later on, as we move ahead, we would have to handle this by strong convincing ability to mention that this is not really a measure of productivity, and also continuous education on these practices and how Scrum is rolled out, and this whole point of productivity versus planning aspect of story point estimation.
Sushman, so just to add again on this point, right? Now, again, why we get into the topic of productivity when it comes to the agile estimations and story points based predictions it's a need that stakeholders have, right? So most of the time when we try to transition from traditional ways to agile ways of working, we tend to be inconsistent the way we deliver the things, the amount of value that we deliver in every iteration. This is a clear concern, right? Whether you are trying to claim that you are one of the high performing teams, you are one of the best agile teams, if you are not able to be consistent in what you deliver, the way you deliver the things, right, you are not being seen as one of high performing teams or agile teams. For stakeholders, you are inconsistent, right? So although story points will not be directly connected to the productivity because it's not meant for that, this will be a good way for you to build that consistency in terms of customers perspective. When customers and stakeholders think of your team as a team who commits for something and delivers that. Got it? That commitment is your decision. It's team's decision. Got it? It's more than a number. Whether it's just 100 story points or 1,000 story points, nothing is going to change. Whether it's 100 or whether it's 1,000 points, that number represents certain amount of value that you're trying to deliver to your clients and stakeholders. Your concern, your focus has to be what is that value proposition, right? If you look at a backlog of a particular product, in every iteration, what is the amount of value that you're delivering is the most important question. So that needs to have some level of consistency. In most of the cases, I'm saying most of the cases because I want to kind of bring those case studies, right, in a very abstract level without, kind of talking about any given organization or team. In most of the cases, we tend to overlook that. We just keep saying agile, but in stakeholders and clients head, we are not delivering anything consistently, right? So if it's a velocity, it's a number, right? That number needs to be consistent after few sprints, few iterations. So example, if you are saying, hey, our team velocity is 200 story points, right? Or 50 story points, let's say, that number has to be somewhat consistent. So it doesn't have to be exactly 50. It should be closer to that. It could be, end up somewhere at 45 or 55. So it shouldn't be 100, right? That does not make sense, right? What? Because at the end of the day, although this does not get attached to any given time unit, stakeholders want to see what exactly you have done within a given iteration. That's the question. So you need to be ready to answer that question. So when you are measuring the productivity, when you are measuring the team's efficiency, the effectiveness, use the velocity, team's velocity, that is the amount and the pace of the delivery, as a useful measure, right? Don't try to have a very strict target or a measure. Have a range, right? And then try to stabilize that over a period of time. That is definitely helpful for your team and as well as the organization, to prove that you are being consistent as a team. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up. It's a very practical thing. So the other thing is, when you are making your commitments, there are two ways of making a commitment. One is looking at your historic data, historic velocity achievements, and figuring out the mean number, right? Average number, right? So you have to look at multiple sprints to do that. Don't just look at 2 sprints and conclude that number. You have to look at 5 to 6, even more sprints, to look at your average velocity, right? Mean velocity. So if it's, let's say, 150, 75, 75, 75, 50, 55, things like that, then, it's not 50, it's not 100. It's somewhere in between. So you need to figure that out. The other thing is, right, so if you are not so confident on that, validate that with teams commitment based judgment. So ask the team, hey, what is your confidence in delivering what you have agreed to deliver, right? Sometimes the team might say, hey, we are really confident that this number is achievable. Sometimes they come back and say, hey, although this sounds like our average, it's not. We work a lot of OT in order to get these numbers right, achieved. Then it's not the right velocity for you, right? So you need to figure out the velocity where you don't work OT, where you don't put a lot of additional effort into work, right? Otherwise, team will keep, working OT, which is not going to help the team, right? So it is the sustainable pace that you're looking at. What the velocity represents is a sustainable pace where you can keep delivering the right amount of value in every iteration. Why we use a story points? It's a relative way of scoping the work that we are trying to do, right? At the end of the estimation process, what we are saying is something like, it looks like this is what we can commit for. It's never ever saying this is exactly we are going to deliver and it is written in a stone. No, you can't do that in agile world because we are not knowledgeable enough. We are not having enough insights by the time we start implementing certain stories as well, right? We keep a lot of uncertainties, complexity around what we are trying to do. We never ask the product owner to put down each and every requirement that we need to worry about. No, right? We are saying give us the sufficient information so that we can get this story from to do to done. We are saying give us the sufficient level of details. Then what happens, for the rest of the details? That is where you need to have that conversation during the implementation, because if you pay a lot of attention finalizing every bit of detail, you're going to waste a lot of time finalizing unnecessary information. Let the team start picking up, right? They should be able to complete the work, but you're not finalizing very tiny, very uncertain details. When you don't know something, you are saying, hey, get this done. This is your benchmark, this is the base story. We will clarify the rest of the things, right? Within the process. So you start clarifying things while you're working on it. So that is why I'm saying your ultimate goal at the end of your story points estimations or the planning is to say something like, hey, dear stakeholders, dear team, it looks like this is what we are trying to achieve, right? It's not a definite commitment. It's a kind of an indicative commitment that we are trying to achieve. However, over a period of time, we need to get some consistency around what we deliver. So that's where you need to agree on your average velocity. Yeah. So for that, look at your historic velocity achievements, figure out the appropriate number for your team, right? And then, after, even after agreeing on that number, ask the team, hey team, what do you think? Do you think you can do a little extra, right? Without paying a lot of attention, extra time, without working a lot of OT, right? Without working OT at all, right? Do you think you can accommodate this one more story as well? If the team says yes, go ahead with it. If the team says no, this is all, let's try with this. If we complete this within the sprint, let's onboard the other one. So that's another approach, right? Whatever you do at the end of the sprint, the amount of work that you deliver should be justifiable, right? Should be satisfying your stakeholders, satisfying your own self, right? So as a team, you should feel like this is great work, right? So we have accomplished a lot, right? So use velocity as a way of empowering the team than just telling them you got to do this. This is kind of written in a paper and communicated to the stakeholders. If you don't deliver this, they're going to kill us. Don't do that. Never ever do that, right? So I tend to kind of use this as a kind of a way of empowering the team. So at the end of the sprint, what if you can see the team completes everything, you celebrate it, right? Let them feel like, celebrated, kind of sense of achievement, because they committed for something and they hit it. Yeah. So that's the right way to look at. Sushman, just wanted to kind of wrap up the discussion there. So what's your next agenda item,
Sure.
Sushman?
Actually, was going to break for questions before we move into
Yeah.
our interactive session. Actually,
So quick time
uh,
check, Sushman, right? So we have 40 minutes. So what?
we have 20 minutes.
Oh, sorry, we have 20 minutes. You are right. Right. So that's not going to be enough for the simulation, I guess, right?
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
Shall we go ahead with the Q&A? Maybe
Yeah. I think.
that's oh, well.
Yeah. That for this moment, I think it should be pretty good. Uh, hopefully, a few people did drop off. Hopefully, the people who are in here have a few questions which are still unanswered. And
Yeah. Yeah.
if you have
So
any questions, please do. Yeah.
I see one question from Dulan. Maybe I'll read it. Some teams attempt measure story points without completing actual feature or story. When teams tend to measure the capacity, not the finished work in some iteration. How can we avoid this? Okay, so capacity versus your velocity commitment is your question, right? So the capacity should never be based on very specific uh, hours, right? So I can share this with you. Sushmat, remind us to send this template to
Okay.
the guys. So this is something that I use practically even at Vetstoria, right? I use something called weather forecast, right? That's a minimal way of doing the capacity estimations. All what you need to do is to kind of put down the dates for the dates available for your sprint, uh, count for the unavailabilities, right? In certain cases, those are the leave days, those are the kind of training days, those are the kind of different assignments. So you could say, whether someone is 100% available for the project or someone is just 50% available, right? Based on which you look at the man days available for you, and that is tied up somewhat kind of connected to the story points capacity, right? Because let's say you have the full capacity, that is, let's assume 60 man days, entire sprint, right? That's basically 6 people into 10 days, right? So I'm sorry, it's just one, right? So if one person works for 10 days, it's basically 6 into 10, 60, right? If 5 people are there, it's basically 60 into 5, 300, right? Man days. Now, let's say your story points estimation is velocity commitment agreement is somewhere around 200 story points. So 300 man days means 200 story points. Now imagine, right, this is the month of December, 50% of your colleagues are on leave. Now instead of 300 man days, you have just 150 man days. Now can you go for the same velocity? No, not at all, right? So it's half. So it makes sense for you to reduce the velocity by 50%. Yeah. So only purpose here is just to have an indicative proportional commitment given rather than blind commitment given. So if you don't know how what is the capacity you have no way of measuring the right velocity commitment. Yeah, don't go into very detailed capacity planning. That's a waste of time, right? So Dulan, so what you need to do is basically establish such practice for you to understand indicative capacity that you have for the upcoming sprint, right? Just counting the leave and unavailabilities from your team members. Then have a high level mapping to your story points, right? The same template will also allow you to keep a buffer, right? Cushion for some uncertainty. Let's say you are working on a highly uncertain deliverable. Then discuss with the team, figure out a kind of a person for that uncertainty. So for example, let's say 10% of uncertainty. So that will reduce the velocity by 10%, right? So what you're saying is some teams attempt measure story points without completing actual feature or story. I really don't get that. When teams tend to measure the capacity, not the finished work. Okay. So you don't measure the you don't consider capacity for your story point estimations. You keep the capacity for you to figure out your kind of commitment, right? If you have 50% capacity compared to the 100% capacity, what's the commitment you are giving? So you keep estimating everything relatively, right? At the end of the estimation, then you look at the capacity. Your regular story points, the velocity is 200. Now you have 50% availability. So it becomes 100 story points. Then you look at the stories and ask, what are the stories that we can get done within this sprint? Because you have just ability to work on 100 story points only. So then you ask the product leadership, you ask the team, hey, what makes sense for us to deliver now? That's where the prioritization comes during your planning. You have to pick up the most important independent stories that you can deliver. So ideally, your sprint goal should be to deliver something meaningful even within that 100 story points worth of work. Does that answer your question, Dula? Yeah, of course, you have to estimate DOD. You don't estimate the partial work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have
Yep.
to understand the DOD and estimate that. Keep estimating your backlog. At the end of the estimation process, look at the capacity available, right? Then calculate the commitment that you can go for. Pick up the stories to match the number. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Roshan.
Yep.
Well, that's
My
a
pleasure.
good one. There was also another one surrounding, it might have been touched upon this one itself. So is it always necessary to use user stories, story point, or story points velocity in an agile company? That's
I will ask that. I love that question. Okay, so I'm just messaging on the Zoom about a detailed article that I wrote about avoiding spillovers, right? So it's pure tacit knowledge that I gathered through years, right? So this is kind of a living document. Whenever I kind of come across some understanding, tend to go and update that document, although there's no version history there. So I forgot the question. Sushman, can you repeat that?
Sorry, it was around whether we would have to use
Okay,
story
got it.
points
Got
in
it.
an
Got
agile.
it. No, no, not at all. So it's just one option, right? You don't have to use it as a mandate. If you use it as a mandate, you're going to get that wrong. Why you? I'll give you a context, right? Say you are a support team. My question is, does story points estimations make sense? I'll tell you the answer as well. So you can tell your answer also. No. Yeah. There's no way the support priorities, support related bugs and fixes can be predicted. Yeah. Because it's a continuous requirement pipeline. Every day requirements, the issues keep coming, right? Now, there's no way you can use story points based estimations. If you try to do that, that's going to be a malpractice, right? You estimate something and things change, right? And you are trying to predict the work that you're going to do in the next few days and things change. No, don't ever think of using story points if you have a highly uncertain set of requirements. An environment where you have uncertain requirements coming up. Don't try to estimate. Also, don't try to estimate if your stakeholders are like, kind of saying, don't worry about the estimations. All what we want is the team to deliver the progressive value, right? We are not going to ask you when exactly you are going to deliver these features, right, in months. But we would ask you, what is the immediate release and what are the things that you're trying to release. Don't even tell us when exactly you are trying to release, but ensure that you have the smaller slices, right? Those smaller stories created so that you create releases daily and weekly basis, right? So I know quite a few teams, particularly, right, since I work with a lot of quite a several Netherlands startups and scale ups, right? So Netherlands is a place where they are emphasizing a lot on this practice, non-story point based planning. Majority of the teams I work with, they did not support our story points estimations. But whenever I felt it's really, really needed to get the predictions that they are expecting us to commit for, I insisted, convinced, and influenced stakeholders and the teams to get there, right? But whenever there was a context where we could deliver the things continuously, everyone is happy, they are excited about what we are delivering week by week basis, you really don't have to go for story point based estimations, right? Then another thing comes up, right? Then should we use Scrum, right? Is it a mandate? No. Scrum is one of the frameworks only. However, that is the major uh, framework mostly used by most of the organizations and agile teams. That does not mean you always have to be Scrum. Yeah. So even in the current organization, Vetstoria, we have certain Kanban teams. We don't run sprints there, right? We have few teams following Scrum. We are trying to optimize that framework as much as possible because we need that prediction. We need that consistency. Yeah. Hope that answers your question. Sushman, who asked that question?
Sorry, I was saying, unfortunately, there isn't a name on it.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And another question is, generally in an SOW, statement of work, the effort is included as a rough order of magnitude estimate, right?
Yeah.
And can story points be used to provide a rough estimate is the question.
Tricky question, a good one. I would say yes and no. I'll tell you why I say that. Yes, because that, like what myself and Zushman were trying to discuss, we need some way of predictions if you want to predict the work that you're trying to deliver in the coming weeks, right? We are not going to use story points to predict the work for the months, upcoming months. No, for sure. But if you want to predict the work that you're trying to deliver within the next few days and weeks, use story points, right? No, if you are going to have a direct mapping between your story points, numbers, and days and hours, don't. You are killing yourself. You will never able to stick to your promises because that's not meant to get there, right? So remember this, right? What stakeholders want to know, you have to convince them. You have to have convincing power, influencing power to convince them to deviate from that practice of asking the timeline if they want you to be agile, right? Shift their mindset from asking timelines to have high level indicative release time windows, right? So their question should be, what can we deliver in the next 2 weeks? What can we deliver in the next 1 month, right? So use story points to get those decisions enabled. So when you do the sprint planning, you know what you're trying to deliver within the next 2 weeks, right? What if you can bundle a release, MVP release within that 2 weeks? Then you can go back to the stakeholders and say, hey, stakeholders, we did our planning. We were able to do a bit of release planning and have a high level release plan that we can achieve. Again, you will never be able to write that on a paper and then promise. It's not going to be a promise. It's an indicative, good enough forecasting that you will communicate to the stakeholders, right? But being agilists, scrum masters, project managers, agile project managers, and agile delivery professionals, you have to develop that convincing power, right? That's where most of the project managers are lacking, right? So that's where myself, Sushman, started kind of discussions, right? We started brainstorming, going through these discussions, figuring out, how exactly we can get there, right? So you need to get that uh, influencing power yourself, and then start working towards it. So don't do that mapping. Don't try to do that mapping and say, hey, story points are directly mapped into the timelines. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a very practical one. I would say 99% of Sri Lankan agile teams are there, right? I know because I have worked in quite a few organizations, including big ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for that one, Niro. There's actually one more question. I'm a bit
Maybe
curious.
you can answer.
As well. Sure.
Try
yeah.
to answer that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. There's one other where the team, one of our people have posted saying that the engagement is kind of low, and it's one of the challenges that they are having with using story points.
Oh,
that,
no,
of
not
course,
at all.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Okay.
But it seems like in their team, there's low engagement somehow.
Okay.
But yeah, that's right. So it seems like it's a downside that they are facing. If that is reality, then they would have to kind of, make it more interactive. Is what we would have to do at this point. So story points in itself is definitely a place to bring in the whole team. So that requirement is checked. Make sure that as many team members are there from all areas of specialization to get this done. Secondly, it's going to be a team sport. So then that engagement is necessary.
Yeah. That's why
Finally,
it's called a sport.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right. So finally, also, my opinion, or my observations, it's, the team ultimately agrees on one value, or they come to as close of a value, and then we call consensus on those values. So having those things baked in and built into stories, it should be something that's a team sport and should be engaging the team all along. So to build that up, we might have to make it more interactive. So one of the first things, bringing in this whole card pack, eating it across, making it more fun, that alone adds up to that, interactivity and so on. So maybe I know the pandemic is not really the best time for us to be sharing card packs and so on, but at least there are online ways like planetpoker.com is something that I use personally in some of my teams. So that makes it interactive. And also, as the host of planning poker, just bringing this alone. I think as a host, people who are part of that hosting duties, it would be their responsibility to kind of drive that discussion to a certain extent. Of course, there can be other interesting points that are brought in from various other people who could make it interactive, and we would have to depend on those from time to time. But ultimately, kind of more of those responsibilities falls with the host. So ask questions, see how things are coming up as part of the differences between the team members. So if most of the team members are kind of agreeing on similar numbers or similar story point values, I think you're having it pretty easy in your teams, and you're having a good understanding within the team members itself. That's another plus point. But if there is a difference, always a good opportunity to start asking the questions as to how can you do it so faster? What is it that you're seeing that the rest of the team members are not seeing? So those questions are like go-to questions. You can start off with those, and then fill out the engagement values, like bring up that engagement through bringing that interaction between the team members and so on.
Yeah, so just few things to add, Sushman, right? So I mean, you covered most of it. Just few things to mention. So as Sushman mentioned, so most of us might not be having the most optimal ability to lead a discussion, facilitate a discussion. So this is something that you have to master if you are the one who leads those discussions, because there's always a better way of doing the thing. So you kind of need to experiment, do your research piece continuously, right, to ensure that you have that interaction. One other thing, so I would like to introduce you a great tool, Miro, right? That's the kind of the best tool that I have come up so far come across in terms of facilitating. Thanks for the correction. Yeah, so I'm just typing it here, right? Not round robin. So two things that I just want to add here: use a tool. There will be other tools as well, but Miro is one of the great tools where you can pretty much do everything that you want to do in an agile context, including the road mapping discussions, to the prioritization discussion, to the Kanban boards, to the retrospection, to the planning poke, everything, right? So the other thing is always use an interactive facilitation technique like round robin. Round robin could be facilitated in many ways, right? So what you need to do is to give the control to the team, let them on it, yeah, and also ask questions, right? So the moment you keep asking questions, they got to be ready with the questions, right? There's no way of being a passenger. So we are also, I mean, we also tend to become passengers in these long online meetings particularly. So as a facilitator, you need to be mindful about it and then break that habit, right? So whenever you notice, okay, there's no enough interaction, do something about it. You can find out something to break that monotonous way of operating. Yeah,
That's true.
great questions. I'm
Cool.
saying, so while I was typing, I missed the typing. I said round robin. It's round robin.
Cool. So we are on time at the moment, just 1 minute past. So I think we'll wind it up in that case, Niro.
Yeah, so maybe would like to just do a round robin again, right? So let's see whether we can get it interactive up to a level. So you can also type your comments in the chat segment. So one question, two things to answer quickly, right? The first one, tell us just one thing you really loved about the discussion. Just one thing, very briefly. Second thing, one area of improvement that you think we can work on for the next meeting. Yeah. In the meantime, we also would like to invite any one of you to be a speaker for this forum, because as Sushman said, we just resumed the discussions on meetups.com, Scrum Meetups in Colombo forum. So we would expect speakers coming and contributing as well. You can also become an organizer if you are really, really keen in contributing to the community. It's not just contributing to the community, it is also growing yourself. So Sushman is hosting this thing with those dual intentions, right? Same with me. Yeah. So it's a win-win. It's a win-win. So if you are willing to work with us, let us know as well. So maybe can we ask someone? I mean, some of you to just speak up as well. So anyone to just tell us one thing you really loved about the session? Hopefully you are not sleeping. No one is fallen asleep.
Yeah, it's good discussion, Niro. Thanks, Sushman. Mostly, I got your experience is a very what you deliver on with your experience is the great stuff. Rather going through fundamentals or the story pointing.
Yep.
That's a great thing. I gather from you two guys. Thanks for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Dulan. Appreciate it. Yeah, keep in touch. Let's collaborate further. So let's make it a win-win, right? So if you want to get into these discussions, let us know. More than happy to onboard you.
Yeah, of course. And just like true meetup fashion, it's by the community for the community. So always. Besides, it was really good, seeing those questions and kind of getting that insights and kind of understanding the various opinions, perspectives, and other viewpoints as well. So that was a good learning for me as well. I kind of found a few things that was not really something that I had faced, but it was really good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Let's not spend any more time since we have already spent 2 hours. Thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate your time. Hopefully, you are satisfied about the value that we kind of managed to deliver from our end, as well as whether you were able to make it a win-win discussion here, right? So let's keep in touch. Wait for the next update. Sushman is basically driving. So I have kind of delegated that to Sushman. Sushman is leading the upcoming meetups. So if you want to be part of it, let us know. We'll work together. Yeah. With that, thank you very much. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank
See you
you.
soon.
Thanks, everyone. Thank
Night,
you.
guys.
Okay,
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.